Swedenborgian community online. Greetings, folks. That was my attempt at a live introduction. And, you know, there's innovation in the air, partly because we are the honored recipients of a innovative guest this evening, Cor Visser-Marchant, the lay leader at a church in Australia, I believe in Canberra, the new church there, and also a fellow spiritual community starter, host, and pastor, I dare say. Cor, welcome to the show.
Well, welcome everybody, and yeah, thank you, Cory. Thank you very much for having me. And I must say that with your introduction, I'm one of the lay leaders here at the local church, and we have a formal minister that also leads the services here in Canberra. So just want to make sure that I'm not presented as being the only leader here in Canberra. But thank you very much.
Yeah, well, thank you for clarifying that. And actually, I said fellow, but you are a little bit more distinguished in a sense because you started, let me get it right, lovetruthact.life yourself, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Yes, so it's my attempt at bringing an online community together with Swedenborgian philosophy and ideas as at the center of it. Thinking that rather than having a central guru-based environment whereby a person offers teachings for others just to consume, to bring an environment where people can discuss and debate ideas, be more open around that. And we see that in Facebook now with the Watching and Reading Swedenborg group. You have people from different perspectives come and talk about some of their differing ideas, and allowing just truth to stand up for that rather than selling it, if you will. For me, you know, the right teachings don't, if it measures with objective reality, then it doesn't need to be sold. It becomes inevitable for everybody else having to reconcile with it, so it will hold itself up.
Well, that's wonderful. And you mentioned that you're really invigorated and inspired by P2P, as you put it, spirituality, where people are connecting with each other online, Facebook and other, you know, through other social media platforms. Tell us about like what you see there in terms of the changes in how we connect spiritually online.
Yeah, so it's not just online, although you know, online offers people from wide-ranging backgrounds all across the globe, being time and space independent, reaching and touching each other. You know, so we can create videos and post it online, and a year or 2 years later, somebody might stumble across it and go, "Hey, this is fantastic," and we've learned from each other. You know, but it's really the model. It's been coming for a while, and I think it's the answer to why religions and church kind of have been regressing, is that the whole model and trust model of having one person leading and everybody else follow, which is quite passive, and you can kind of hide away in a congregation and have you know, pretend that I'm so good because on Sunday I go to church and I take communion, and there's no further demand to my life. I think we've grown into an era now where very clearly that model is no longer acceptable for vast majority. It still has its place, of course, and we still need leaders and we still need teachers, and you know, people come and dip in and out of listening to people like yourselves and myself and others to hear what they've got to say and take away from that. But we've become much more. There's now much more of a requirement of us to be responsible for our own lives and our own spirituality. the world has opened up, and you can kind of see that. I mean, there's a lot more rigorous debate, and there's actually it's not as placid as it once used to be, if you will. You know, it's common. Everybody went to church in smaller communities, and you know, it's like you didn't hear any kind of deviating ideas. And now, you know, you've got different camps standing up and speaking, and individuals having to think much more for themselves and can't hide away anymore. And that's, I think that's a good thing. But it also means that as we all travel through our spiritual life, if we take it seriously, and you know, we actually travel the path, do the inner work, then we have a place where we can mentor and coach others and share with others our experience and pitfalls and learnings, and help each other on that journey and walk with each other. And that becomes really a much more of a peer-to-peer, you know, side-by-side walk, if you will, where we're all become ministers. You know, we're all ministers in essence, you know, and none of us actually own the truth. We're all vessels and you know, channels of reality itself, and the interpretation of what is. And so even at the most basic level, within a single group community, let's say you have you know, 100 people sitting in a congregation, and the minister gives an address. There's 100 different minds that listen to that, and I dare say not two of them will receive the message in identical ways and see it applied in their own mind to their own lives into the same way. So it's not the message that has to be identical. It's the approach to truth that has to match to our own personal lives, for which we are responsible. And so that's how I kind of look at it, right? And so to try and facilitate that, the internet is a wonderful tool to do that.
I think that's wonderful and very insightful. I really appreciated you saying that all of us are ministers, and really, yeah, we minister to everyone we encounter. There's, in essence, a connection to our deepest desires and our motivations in every movement that we make, right? And in a sense, we're promoting that. It could be something destructive or you know, holy, perhaps, somewhere in between. I think we're usually a mix of both. And you know, if we decide to uplift certain elements in others, or get our way in different situations for different goals, in a sense, we could be ministering all sorts of things, even perhaps falsity.
Oh, absolutely. And even if there is some falsity in it, we're not quite right. I mean, who has the right understanding of what reality is in all its, you know, beauty? Some people come closer than others, perhaps, in understanding or understand different aspects of it. And just because we have a slightly different understanding or see a different aspect of it doesn't necessarily mean that we're wrong. It's really the intention behind that understanding that matters more than the understanding itself.
Yeah, it depends on why we're trying to uplift a certain idea, or what our deeper motivations are for creating a certain space. Of course, some politicians today, or certain people today, maybe even myself sometimes, I may be uplifting falsity intentionally. Who knows? But to be discerning about that in others, but especially ourselves, is part of the name of the game, right? Part of our purpose here is to hopefully find some truth for ourselves and use it to uplift other people. What do you find is your purpose for ministry?
Well, yeah, I'm not quite sure, Cory. I thought I was very sure, but things have moved a little bit. So, you know, we talked just before the show started a little bit about the online community that I've got, and I've kind of dubbed that freedom philosophy, starting with my YouTube channel, and kind of morphed that into an online community. and the web domain is lovetruthact.life. And I really like to have that .life, series of things being available now. It's just so perfect now,
That's great.
That's what it's all about. And so last year, I opened that community, online community, and I was hoping to start it off and be part of a moderator and just share my understanding. I talk with a lot of people at work and around me, and people like hearing new and different ideas and a different way of being things, having things explained to them. And I'm fairly blessed with, I feel, in having a good understanding of certain things. And, I've got a lot to learn, but I'm happy and keen to share with how I see things, and I hope that other people might get some positive messages out of it and some useful elements to apply in their own lives. And to do that in an environment that is protected, right? What I wanted to do is not just be in Facebook and have that open, but really have people come together that are a little bit more committed and in an environment that is protected. So, protected in two ways. One is that, people kind of buy into it and have members, and so we know exactly who people are. People can't kind of pretend to be somebody that they're not and then dip in and, attack others and then dip out. Or you can on Facebook and Twitter and others, people can pretend, right? And so you'd like to have a bit more openness. And when it's on a public forum like that, people are also less likely to be open because you don't control it so much. And secondly is also to limit the connection to only people that are seriously committed to their inner work. There's no point having 40,000 or 100,000 or 1 million people subscribing or being a member of something and having only, a dozen people actively engaging with the inner work. Then it just becomes, entertainment, if you will. And I don't want to be in the entertainment business. I want to really help people hold their hand going through the struggles. And it is hard work. People watching you and I, when you apply newfound truth to your own life and you start to scratch the surface and say, oh, actually, hang on, I'm maybe that's a bit selfish of me and I shouldn't be doing this or I shouldn't be doing that, and then try to address that. That takes a lot of effort. And sometimes that can be very disparaging, and people go through all sorts of emotions and hardship in that, because people can be very hard on themselves. And in a public environment, you don't want other people harshly criticizing you either when you're doing that to yourself already, right? So it's a gentle business, and I do feel that I have a place in that, not in traditional ministry. I have given that some consideration, and I partially went through the college here in Australia to study towards a ministry. And I haven't really done much with that in the last few years, but they're more kind of saying, okay, well, ask the Lord, what does he want me to do? And he's kind of led me into making some of these videos and set up the channel and set up this community. And even though it's perhaps hasn't taken off, it's still part of a growth process that's preparatory for something else to come. And what that looks like and what that exactly is, I'm not quite sure. But it's I certainly feel that I have an obligation to share what I do know, and to try and help people on their journey, right? So, and I'm just kind of open to see, well, what form does that take? Not quite sure.
Beautifully put, Cor. I find it quite inspiring, your willingness to just share your wisdom in a way that you think can engage with people in an environment that you have some insight about around it being able to create good space for people to connect and share. And I know on this online community, a lot of our things are open. Some things are more private than others. and it is a balance, and you learn so much along the journey. You know, I find that there's a lot of things I could do better. And I'm curious, you said it hasn't taken off, but it's used, you know, it's in a place of launching off for you, for, you know, finding your continued ministry, inspiring your continued work in whatever way that you choose to. And I'm curious how the Australian New Church in Canberra plays a role in that. What's that experience like for you?
Well, we're a very small group, right? And I think the world over, the church is made up of very small congregations, aging congregations. And as said, you know, because the new church, it follows the traditional, you know, model, you know, the Protestant type of model of church and Sundays. And we've, since Reverend David Moffat came here, I think in 2000, we had a formal congregation established, and we've tried all sorts of different ways of presenting with different lay leaders and different outreach programs, etc. And just being together and talking through things, and as a churchgoer myself, and you know, getting involved in reading the doctrines and reading the Word and applying it to my own life, and being involved as a leader, and that forces you to level peg up a little bit your own, you know, thinking. I mean, it forces you as a leader. You want to make sure that you know what you're talking about. So, and that only comes from practical application to life, right? But that sincerity, that just didn't have to be as part of this congregation, but just spiritual life prepares you for whatever comes, right? So the variety of engagement that we've had with the congregation, with other groups, and the challenges that have been put before us by our leaders and by our minister, you know, does help in that, right? So we learn from each other, and as we challenge each other and take personal responsibility, you can't help but be led by the Lord in your path towards where you need to go. Things fall into place when you do that.
Yeah, I'm curious how you see providence and God working in things falling into place, as you said. I think I had a feeling, a hunch that it had some spiritual underpinnings, your statement.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure how to answer that. So, divine providence is over everything, right? Mm-hmm. So, you start with the premise that there is objective reality. We're just not making it up ourselves, although this postmodern world just likes to think we do, and if everything is okay and everybody's right, well, I'm afraid, sorry, that's not the case. There is an ultimate anchor point, right, which is. And we trust that is the divine creator. So and the divine creator has a nature, and that nature goes out in its creation with natural consequences attached to that. And we can either behave in a way that's in alignment with that and in order, in the order of that reality, and then things fall into place. And part of the order is to recognize that you know, we have thoughts and feelings flowing in, and that we can't live for ourselves alone, right? So the two positions, if you will, in life is you behave, as what Swedenborg says, like a spider, and you sit in your web and you seek to gain everything from life, and it's all about me, and I go out and seek to satisfy me. I want to be happy, and you know, I need to make money, and I need to do this, etc. That's very isolating, right? It's always it's basically the ultimate victim state, if you will, because you're constantly dependent on externals to give you to be satisfied. Whereas the ultimate position in alignment with that order coming from the inside out, from the spiritual into the natural, from the will into the understanding, into the action, into life, is that you seek to give. And then everything is within your control. And it's limitless. And that's like more like a tree, like a fruit tree, right? As Swedenborg describes, is you constantly give, and then you see that fruit come into place and you help others. And there's a natural return that comes out of that you feel satisfied from seeing the benefit from that. Now, then you can make a mistake and say, oh, I'm the good boy, I know everything, I've created that. Or you can say, well, thank you, Lord, for allowing me to be the instrument. And that can be a bit overwhelming from time to time, but that's providence. There's a natural order to creation. Where do you trust? Whether you trust there is a creator or not, even if you think there's a big bang and things happen out of nothing and it's all by sheer chance, there's order. There's still something you have to comply with. And if you're not complying with it, then things become very difficult and strenuous and hard for you. But if you trust that there is a divine creator and therefore there's a purpose, and those, if there is a purpose, then you also have hope. And then when you go through a hardship, then you can go, okay, well, I can trust that under providence, whatever I'm going through leads to a good end. And that's one of the beautiful teachings that Swedenborg gives, is that everything that occurs is allowed to occur because it ultimately leads to good, right? So there's nothing that occurs that is pure evil, if you will. There's always some good that comes from whatever occurs. And provided that we seek to do good, then our own inner struggles will lead to good and lead to a better place. And that's the lived experience that I have. And I think others will find the same way, that once you become Christian, your life becomes so much more difficult than what it was in ignorant bliss beforehand. But it's never been better, right? But if you keep constantly seeking to have your own gains, then it's like the ultimate misery. And even though you kind of get what you want, what you think you want, or what you think you need, you're never really happy, right? So I don't know. I'm hoping that kind of makes sense and answers your question a little bit, in a bit on a tangent there, but
No, I think that was right on. So thank you very much for that. Yeah, I find much of what you said inspiring, and I have a few questions about it. But before we get to those, you mentioned order. And one of the things I love to do in our chats together is I get the opportunity to connect with some folks in our Chatsy. So first I want to say hello to you all, communicating and connecting there. And I want to uplift a question that Paige has for you, Cor. She asks, where are you from in Australia? And correct me if I'm wrong, but you're Dutch, aren't you?
Yes, yeah. If my genetics don't give it away, from my speech, that is, ultimate blunt Dutchman, right? Yeah. So I'm from the Netherlands, born in the Netherlands, but I no longer hold Dutch nationality. I'm, naturalised Australian, and live in Canberra, which is the capital, which is along the eastern seaboard, bit inland between Sydney and Melbourne. And that's where I've, apart from the first few months where I lived in Melbourne, this is where I live with my family and have lived for the last 23 years.
Oh, wonderful. And she wants to know if you know Roz Taylor, who is...
Yes, I do. Yeah.
No, you do?
Yeah.
Oh, great.
I would consider her a good friend of mine. We haven't spent nearly as much time together as I'd like to, because she's travelling the world. On occasion, when she comes to Australia, it's never the right time for us to meet up, because Canberra's a bit out of the way, and most of her family and connections are in South Australia, Adelaide. Yeah.
Yeah, for our listeners. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, no, I've had time to get to know Ross and talk, and there's a few outstanding discussions, I think, for Ross and I.
Oh, that's excellent. Yeah, Ross is amazing, isn't she? And
Oh,
Ross,
I like this. Yeah.
what's that? Sorry.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
like this. Yeah.
yeah. It's hard to refute that Ross is amazing. So it's cool that you two are connecting. And for our listeners, Ross has been a guest on the online community before, and she's in her journey of finding her ministerial niche and studying. And thankfully, she comes to North America every once in a while. So I've also had the blessing of communicating with her. Thank you, Paige. And Paige wants to uplift your point that protected environments is so important for open sharing. Indeed. And it can be a tough balance, because even if you're accepting membership, right, you have to open yourself a little bit unless you go full on background check. But I think, to your point, if someone could just jump in and create a fake name and harass folks, especially if that starts happening, it's good to be able to pull back a little bit and create space for people where they can share personal things, right?
Yeah. So one of the things that I did early on was just give very short-term free membership. And I know some people disagree with me and have disagreed with me. And, you know, in part, it may be why it hasn't quite worked out, although there is free membership on the site now. And I've taken people's advice. My thinking was that you want people to buy into what you're doing and commit some of themselves, right? So years ago, you know, I wanted to learn more about Swedenborg, and I spent, I think, $1,400 on buying a set of books, right? Now most of it is available for free online, which is wonderful. And it's the modern translation as well. But it's about what you value and what you prioritize. And I've noticed that with a lot of things, if you give it away for free, if you don't seem to put a value on it, people don't tend to value it.
Hmm.
And that's kind of a basic psychology, right? Sometimes, you know, if you charge an extra $10 for something, then the perceived value goes up. People spend more time and interest with it, and actually doing something with it. There's another bit of advice that was given by a professional speaker, and she tours around helping other people, writing books, etc. And he explained to me once that when she gave away her presentations and did a tour to try and connect with people and train people and do it for free, only about 6 out of 10 people that registered to come, that had booked to come, showed up. And so 40% of the seats remained empty. If she charged a small amount, 95% of the people that booked turned up, only leaving maybe, you know, 1 out of 100 seats or so empty. And the point she made is that immediately she helped the extra 35% of people. She helped 35% more people, or was actually it's 50% more people out of 60, an extra 30, that's an extra 50% that you are helping and getting a message across, you know. So that just fascinated me to think like that, you know, and I think it's right. It's if we spend too much time giving of our time and our energy to people that aren't really that interested, it's like, you know, you're doing letterbox pamphlets and people throw it straight into recycling. You don't look at it, it's like a waste. But if you spend more time with the people that are actually interested, then you're being much more productive. I hope that kind of makes sense. I know some people will disagree with me, but that's kind of behind my thinking there, right?
Yeah.
You got to try it, right? So.
No, I think that's inspiring for me. It's nice to be able to talk to someone doing similar work, having done similar work, and initiated it, created it from the ground up. And yeah, there's a lot in business, right, around this concept too, uplifting the relationships that really serve your purpose. And I think in a ministry, it's more like our purpose, or you know, the purpose of whatever we would think of as our higher power or God. But that takes some discerning, and I think that discerning is most healthy in that community engagement. So if you're just spreading your attention everywhere and not paying attention to the people who want to share back and connect with you, then yeah, I really feel you there. That it's a waste of time often.
Yeah, I think so. You know, it's important that the people that are willing to apply to their lives and are really keen and see the value, they're helping people, right? Otherwise, you're spreading yourself too thin, and you're not serving anybody.
Yeah, well, and that's the other thing about online is it's easy to spread yourself too thin, I think. You know, especially if you're engaging in multiple platforms and social media, you may get messages from people all over the place, and those are people trying to engage. And so if they're not willing to reconnect towards maybe a central hub, so you can kind of dedicate your time to each other at the same time, it's much harder to manage that, I think.
Yes, it's true. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, great. And I want to connect again with you in the chat. See, I'm seeing a number of people there that are happily engaging with you, Cor. And so we want to uplift our thanks for your insight. And I think the question that's on our minds as our own version of spiritual community is how do you stay robust and stay accountable to each other in this type of connection, especially online where it often feels fleeting? And I think you might have touched on this before, but I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that. And maybe it also connects with something maybe more broad for all of us, is how do we develop lines of accountability and connection that really serve health, our spiritual, physical, emotional health, and how do we go about really checking those and being reflective on them?
Very good question, Cory. So there's two aspects to it, and one is as a leader, I suppose, is one, and second as a participant. And although you can kind of roll them up into one and the same, right? Because we both have the same level of accountability, and that is that we are primarily accountable to ourselves, and we can't control others. What you can do is you can set some ground rules in a community and then try and get people to honor that, and then just be firm about protecting the members within that if they're not accountable. In the same way that you wouldn't have guests in your house if they start to trash the place, you would kick them out, right? If you have an investment property and you have tenants and they don't pay the rent, you go like, well, I'm sorry, but you got to go. In the same way we protect borders in a nation, in the same way we need to protect our church congregations and a spiritual ministry as well. But if people don't have the right intent and engagement that is respectful of that, then they've got to go. You've got to protect that, and you've got to hold people accountable to that as long as the rules are clear. Mm-hmm. Having that, one of my freedom is important, right? So that's why I call it freedom philosophy. It is that having open and robust discussions, allowing that and doing that in public allows us to be held to account. So if I have my ideas and I put it out there and I'm frank, then others can disagree with that and pull me up and say, well, hang on a moment, you seem to say this, but over here you seem to say something else, or your actions are a little bit different. So that seems to be a bit hypocritical, and then you kind of have a mirror held in front of you and you're being held accountable. I think that's a good thing. It's sorely lacking from the public arena at the moment, right? It's something that is critical for the integrity of society, integrity of character. It's also integral to having trust. If I am pretending or feel that I can't be open and frank in what I say, and have to couch my words or be compelled to use language in a certain way, then immediately others around me can no longer trust what I'm saying. Mm. And therefore trust dissipates, and therefore the society disintegrates. So, things like political correct speech, etc., right? And I'm quite lucky having been brought up in the Netherlands, because, there's like a joke that says the British are too polite to be honest, and the Dutch are too honest to be polite, right? That's a bit of a joke. And the British make fun of the Dutch all the time, and that's fine. But one of the aspects that my cultural heritage gives me is a frankness, right? And the culture, it's almost inappropriate to not have an opinion on something back in the Netherlands, or to not engage in a public discussion or have an opinion on that. And so around dinner tables and around in society, you will have discussions about most different topics, and people can vehemently disagree with one another and still have respect for one another, because we have even considered opinions, and we tolerate people having different opinions and different viewpoints. And that's important, right? And so in a spiritual community, the highest level of accountability to yourself is to engage publicly and honestly in discussions, and then for yourself, have that introspection about what newfound ideas and principles, if you accept them, of course. If you accept, it starts out when you go on your spiritual path and say, I believe there is a creator, can no longer run away from that. And you go, okay, well, what does that mean in terms of those principles? And you rebuild all of your thinking from the ground up. And that's what we're called to do all the time, is tear it apart, rebuild it up, tear it apart, rebuild it up, until you have a foundation that is unmovable and unshakable and constant. And then you build on that, and then you start resting on that and build your thinking up from that. You're accountable for yourself. We all have to make sure that our thinking aligns to our principles, and our life aligns to our principles. And if I'm fairly simple man, right? I like to go to the ultimate extremes, and rather than engaging in although I do in topical discussions, you always go back to what are the ultimate fundamentals that underpin that, and then rebuild that up, and then see if you come to the same conclusion. And I think that's the way to hold yourself accountable.
Wow. Yeah, that is awesome. Thanks, Cor. I think we all can use those ideas in our own living, and how beautiful is it to be called to that kind of life where you really feel inspired, convicted, what have you, in checking yourself and reflecting and trying to live up to your principles. Because I think all too often we get caught up in the principles themselves, or just the visage of them, or the label, whether it's political, religious, or what have you, and we say, oh, these are our ideas, and you're probably wrong if you don't agree, but we don't actually tend to live up to those ideas. And in fact, we should kind of put more emphasis on living up to them, and then drop the whole, well, if you don't agree, you're immediately wrong. Because as you said earlier, truth is relative. We're all in an appearance of truth and rationality, and with infinite room to grow, right?
Yeah, there is an objective reality. So there is a way to describe reality itself that is, but we can never hold the truth fully. We might have truths or facts, if you will, and, there could be some distinguishing factors between the two. But to think that that we hold truth and comprehend it all, that's just madness. So we always have to allow for the idea that what we think to be true may be so or may be completely wrong. But ultimately, we've got to convince ourselves, and our understanding is what's feeding us and what is feeding our actions, right? So we've got to accept something, and put it into practice. But we always have to be willing to have that changed, provided it agrees with the principles that we hold up to. So, the other day I was having a discussion with a friend about the potential existence of aliens, right? And I was talking to him about that. So, actually, this is getting too deep. I think we need a bottle of wine for this and a few more hours. So
Yeah.
let's park this. But it's why I don't believe that there are any, right, in on our level of consciousness. Always a small fraction in my mind that would allow that things can change where it's different, right? So even though I'm convinced with certain things, you've got to leave the door ajar just a little bit, right? Have that little bit of acceptance that I might be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, most likely I will be wrong, but you got to go, well, okay, well, how much does it matter, right? What does knowing this or that, or if it's this way or that way, how does that then practically affect my spiritual life right now? Right?
Yeah.
How does it change how I behave? And then you're getting into more deeper fundamentals.
Oh, I think that's really cool. Trying to be discerning about whether it matters to argue about it, to reflect deeply on, and it's interesting that often our concepts of certain things or our ideas are an image of something deeper within us. Like, so, it may not matter whether or not we think aliens or X, Y, or Z, but sometimes it reveals something about the way we're approaching our living, our maybe motivations that we're not quite aware of or unwilling to grow in. And I'm curious about your growth journey, if I can use that segue. So you are a lay leader at the Canberra New Church, and of course you are the spiritual leader of lovetruthact.life, to the extent anyone can be called that, right, as to your point. So how did you find Swedenborgian thought, and how did you end up where you are?
Fascinating journey. I'm sure we all have fascinating journeys. Most of us have fascinating journeys. Some have been blessed or cursed to be brought up in the church, and I've been blessed to have not been brought up in the church. So I know what life is like outside of the church. I wasn't raised as a Christian, so I came to Christianity later in life. And when I was in my early 20s, I kind of said, look, I've had enough of religion because my girlfriend at the time didn't like some of the ideas that I was getting into, and I was talking to some Jehovah's Witnesses, and she was part of a Protestant church, and it became so confronting, or that kind of tension and conflict between this is the right religion, or this is the right religion, and I was just trying to follow the thought process of logic, right? So I kind of convinced myself that there is something like a spiritual reality. There's more than meets the eye. But because of that tension, I said, look, I've had enough of this. This is just ridiculous. And I know a lot of people feel like this, to see this hypocrisy where people are supposed to be tolerant and loving and caring, being so aggressive and negative towards people of different beliefs. And my mum, so I grew up with my mum, single mum, after the divorce of my parents. And, she wasn't a religious person, but, she lived a life of truth. And one thing it was two things actually it taught me that stick with me. One is to not lie, and which is, of course, a good principle to have, right? And particularly don't lie to yourself. And secondly, is to treat others as you would have them treat you, right? That's a golden rule. And in that rest the whole law and the prophets. So the whole word comes down to that single golden rule, right? So you couldn't have a better teaching.
That's quite sad, right?
Go law of attraction, and then look at what Swedenborg describes the afterlife as like. I said, it just becomes more and more true every time you look at it. So I gave that up, and I go, that's enough. So, but I was still philosophizing, right? Thinking, what does this mean, and what does that mean, and do spirits interact, and what's all of that kind of thinking a lot of people go through. And then I met this girl from Australia, my wife, future wife, and she's a fourth or fifth generation Swedenborgian, right? So her great uncle, his great uncle. Anyway, how many greats? Anyways, a few generations back, right? And George Marchant, who actually owned a soft drink manufacturing plant here and made a lot of money, and basically donated a lot of his wealth to the church here, and basically paid for the buildings to be built in Australia. And so she was brought up in the church, and we met in London, and we went to, on one of my visits to her while we were kind of courting and getting to know each other. She wanted to go to church on a Sunday, and I said, yeah, okay, fine, I wasn't going to stop her. I wasn't particularly keen on going to church, right, at that time. But I said, look, I'm happy to accompany you, but I'm not singing. Yeah. And so we went there, listened, and came away very, very unappealing. I can't even remember the message, right? But what I did take away from that, and that was quite powerful, is that the leader there, and my wife will know who it was. I think it was Reverend Duckworth over there. But Dennis Duckworth, I think it was. But anyway, I'm not quite 100% sure. But what I did walk away with is that he presented in terms and language saying, the way I understand this is like this, or the way I see it is like that. If I read it correctly, then this is what it says. There were a number of times where it's kind of very clearly having a caveat in his saying that allowed me to accept or reject what he was teaching, as opposed to this is how it is, and this is what it says, and this is how you should be living your life, the traditional kind of method of preaching. And so that actually resonated with me. I go like, wow, that's a little bit different. And so he gave me a book, which is Presence of Other Worlds by Wilson von Dusen. I read the first 3 chapters. I go, wow, this is a fascinating individual, this Emanuel Swedenborg. When people of that caliber present something, you listen, right? It's okay, well, and I've given a dozen of those books away before I ever finished the book myself. And then of course, the relationship developed, moved to Australia, managed to get a pilot project here and finish my degree, and now married with 3 kids, and where I am now. So to develop my thinking. So I got drawn into Swedenborg in that way, and the things that Swedenborg was writing and saying, and the teachers that I was listening to were saying all resonated with me with thoughts that I had already developed myself, like that there can't be just one single religion that is, that heaven is membership based, and it's only, you have to be part of this group to be saved or not. That just didn't make sense to me, right? The idea that people who live a good life but are not calling themselves Christian or can't accept certain teaching, that they are doomed, that didn't make sense to me. And a loving God, right, as opposed to a vengeful or a God that punishes or sends people to hell. So the idea that we basically send ourselves to hell, if you will, that made a lot more sense to me than what we are traditionally taught. And so when you look at a lot of atheists in their criticism of Christianity, I go like, I'm right there with them. I accept exactly what they say. I don't trust that either, right?
Yeah.
I'm Christian. So at Swedenborg, right? So it kind of really resonated with me tremendously. And then I go like, well, wow, why don't more people know about this? And so, and then of course we started a church here with Reverend David Moffat coming, and the group kind of bantered together. And so the rest is kind of history, Cory. Never looked back since. That was my journey. But constantly the developing of actually applying what you learn to your life, right? That's how you grow in understanding and learning more, and just not just reading books.
Well, that's a fascinating journey, and yeah, it's really cool how, as you said, many of our journeys go, but I find just hearing that kind of discovery of something that really speaks to you in a way that kind of just points to the open door already in your heart, that you're not wanting to be judgmental, or you don't want to damn everyone out the gate and whatever you believe. So just like some fundamental things were there, but also just this deep rationality that you responded to, or it fit with your rationality at least. And yeah, I think that's really helpful also to hear how you resonated so much with just the willingness of that minister that you heard to say, these are just my ideas and my thoughts, take them as you may, and I still have plenty of room to grow and learn. And it seems like you are a wonderful image of that yourself, Cory.
Very gracious, thank you, Cory. But of course, that's all the Lord's doing, right?
Yes.
He's beaten me over the head a few times.
Yeah, same here all too often. No, and I think that's one of the things that I really resonate with. And it took me a while to get there, but to just the idea that active awareness that this isn't our own doing, that this goodness isn't ours, any beauty that you see, any wisdom, any love that's serving a good purpose, which is everything, as you said earlier, but essentially the goodness in it, that's from something else, our higher power or divinity. And I think that just releases us from the destructive cycle of ego. What do you you mentioned that earlier, and I'm curious, do you find that that's like a key in transformation in spiritual life, or are there certain things that you typically point to when you share your spirituality and what you're trying to uplift in others? Sorry,
what is that, Cory? What key? What?
Oh, sorry.
Missed the question.
Yeah. So do you have certain things in your teaching and in your beliefs that you tend to go back to? And maybe you've already shared them, because if they're so, you've mentioned them, right?
Yeah. Look, it's discussions with other people and the fundamentals. That depends very much on the topics that raised, but the first premise, of course, is the trust that there is a divine, and then without a divine, there's no hope and there's no purpose, and of course the logic of nothing coming out of nothing, no matter how you redefine nothing, right? Is that first fundamental logic when you talk to people that haven't got that acceptance of a divine. But once you have that acceptance of a divine, then you start thinking about, well, what's the nature of that divine, and how does that operate? And then clearly freedom is then fundamental part of that, right? So one of the core aspects that underpin my thinking is freedom. And that's why I like Swedenborg so much, because he's very clear about that. And it's obvious, it goes without saying, that we are free to operate against the divine, and that's kind of evidence of the divine existence, in an ordered world. But so, and with freedom, if you follow the logic, because there's so much we have in the world is like manufactured consent, right? And you get that if you don't have absolute freedom, and so we have to convince ourselves, and so we can't convince others, we can't think for others, and so the only way that people can convince themselves is if they understand what's going on. So you can't have freedom unless you have a choice and you have clear options. You can't have any options unless you understand those options and the consequences of those options. And because as soon as some of the options or knowledge is being withheld from you, then you're no longer really free, right? So, okay, let's say there's 4 doors to go through and I'm only showing you one, you're no longer free to choose. So then your actions or your behavior is no longer part of your will, but it's just, well, you don't have a choice. Same if I only show you 2, but there are 3 doors, then I'm withholding something from you. You make a choice within those. And so having that personal responsibility and transformation, that inner transformation only comes when people convince themselves, right? Swedenborg describes this very clearly, and it's like this in all of life, right? I have an active interest in politics, and it fascinates me, and I see a lot of happening, and I go, so I'm aghast there with how we treat the citizenry, the burghers, and saying, well, they can't think, but we need to allow people to think. And spirituality, obviously, personal freedom, personal responsibility comes only by personal understanding and rationality, which will then change our being from within to enlighten the choices that we make. So if this is why teaching is so important. This is why being honest is so important. If I'm withholding information or misrepresenting something, and I'm actually stealing from others an opportunity to learn, and I'm stealing from others an ability to choose. And if others don't have a legitimate choice, then they're not actually changing, right? Then you're removing freedom from them. So self-compulsion is an important element to our spiritual life. And the external life is all a reflection of and part of, a tie to our inner life. So everything comes from within. And so if we are telling people, you must live like this, that this is the only truth, or you have to believe this and not allow for discussion or a process of discovery for another person to come to their own conclusions, is actually doing a disservice. And so therefore you're best to focus on the intention first and foremost, and then follow of the understanding after that. And you tackle people on, and I'm not very good at this, and I'm still coming to learn this, because I'm sometimes a bit too keen to share my understanding with people as opposed to knowing how to challenge people through and guide them through their own thinking. And God willing, that will come if that's my place, because I'm always happy to share my thoughts on things. But people got to go through their own processes to understand things, right? And so my process of thinking is very different. So I might just jump 2 big steps and I'm there at the end, and another person is kind of walking a different path and struggling to come to the end conclusion. And because I jump to the fundamentals, sometimes I lose people in that process. So, as I said, I need to develop just that capability of asking questions more and guide people through their own individual thinking. But it's that freedom process of people running their own pathway of discovery, and allow people to do that is very important. Freedom is probably the core concept for me in public life and spiritual life alike. Yeah,
I love that. Yeah, it's at the crux of reality, and it's at the crux of, or in my opinion, and it's at the crux of your approach. I think that's wonderful. It's tough, I would think, and I find it tough for myself, at least, to meet people where they are, because we can say that that's what we should do, but doing it in practice, of course, takes takes a lot of work. Well, thank you for that. And I also really appreciated where you started there and saying, you know, it starts with divinity, and then thinking about what that divinity would be like and what makes sense, and not necessarily shoehorning things that people have told us, but actually rationally engaging. But to your point, often it does take just allowing yourself to be convicted, and then from that conviction say, okay, what do I need to change? What do I need to hold myself to? And that takes work too. I was atheist myself. You know, I had a lot of religious stuff in my background, but didn't believe in God. And I found that once I did, it was a rational leap. Like, you know, if it doesn't make sense to you, it typically just doesn't, and you don't really want to hear anything about it. You may even just make fun of people who believe in God, as many of us often do, and whatever our standpoint is. But I found, like, as an atheist, I found a lot of that community was just really dismissive of the idea of God. But once I believed in God, I was like, oh wow, I'm crazy to my old self, and that was kind of fascinating.
Yeah, it's one of the teachings that I like with Swedenborg. One of the elements at which you can kind of judge for yourself whether or not you have the right end of the stick is whether you can see both sides of a coin. If you can only see one perspective, you probably are on the wrong side. You know, and before, you know, and I was very, in my early years, dismissive as well, and making fun of people that believed. And I look back at horror now, I go like, oh, dude, that was just so immature and juvenile, you know. And so I was, you know. But now you look back and you go like, well, I can understand how people come to that conclusion and have that belief.
Yeah.
But you see both sides of the coin now. And so that's good litmus test, right? To see, do you understand how people might arrive at a different perspective? That's a good litmus test to see whether or not you've actually rationally considered the alternatives. Mm-hmm. And of course, you only have, as I said, you only can actually have a proper choice and have that conviction, that transformation within, if you have made that choice willingly and knowingly, with full knowledge of what the alternatives are. And so then you can say, okay, that's real transformation at work.
Well, I think those are words of wisdom to end on. And I have to thank those of you in the chatty who've connected with us this evening, especially because I've seen a little of what Cor just described in the chatty, where, you know, you're talking about some things that you're not necessarily sure of personally. And then you say, well, why would we do that? And some of the rest of you have shared the reasons why. And I think community is important for that, just that reason, as Cor was sharing. It's a place where different perspectives, variety can come together and create something more beautiful through maybe helping that spiritual process of discernment. So thank you to you all, and thanks from the deepest part of my heart, Cor, for coming on the show.
Oh, well, thank you very much for having me, Cory, and may God bless this ministry you're having here, and bless the people that are watching this, and may their inner spiritual life and journey be successful.
Wonderful. Well, everyone, go forth knowing that you are quite loved. Bye.